It is my pleasure to be up here at this event. And I want to welcome you to the University of Cincinnati, especially those of our community partners. This is an event and a week, Sustainability Week at UC, that really is a signature. And I do want to thank Pews. This group is a cornerstone, I would say, of our institution because a public institution should engage with the public. And although Angela talked about Pews being engagement with science, they really bring about challenges and things that our society really needs to discuss. And sustainability, for me, is at the top of that chain. Without these discussions, then we're not going to move the needle in the places that we really do need to move the needle. And so I'm very appreciative of you and your organization for helping us do that. A few of us had an opportunity to talk to Mitch yesterday at lunch about sustainability. And so when you say that word sustainability, it means so many different things to so many different people. And as we were going around the table, you know, from a denotative standpoint, everyone had an understanding, but from a connotative standpoint, we were all different. We had people from finance, we had people who were in the community at various organizations. We had faculty present, we had administration present. They all had a different viewpoint. What I personally took away from that conversation was the fact that when we talk about sustainability, we're all in a different space in one way or another, but we're all together in a way. And so one of the things that we need to do is shepherd organization through conversation and discussion, and I know tonight's event is going to help us do that. So for those that don't know me, I would be remiss if I did not put up data or facts. I'm a chemist by training. I have to do this. So one of the things that it's on my mind as I think about sustainability is really people and the number of people and resources that's projected to be around in about 25 years or so. So right now there's around 8 billion people on the planet. It's projected to grow in the next 25 years to around 10 billion people. Projections suggest there's a lot of resources that are going to be needed if we're going to live the same lifestyle that we're leading now. And we understand that around the globe, there's differing lifestyles that people lead. That projection says we're going to need about 80% more energy if we're going to function in the same ways. And where is that energy going to come from if we're using depleting resources? So we have to think about how we're going to sustain ourselves throughout the next 2 decades, where a lot of things is expected to hit in the next 25 years. So these conversations are going to be really, really important, and I know that we're going to have a really good lecture from Dr. Mitchell Thomashow. So enough about me and enough about some of the things that I think. I think we're all here to talk with Mitch Thomashow, who's a national prominent leader in sustainability initiatives and environmental learning, and he worked to promote ecological awareness and environmental learning and improvisational thinking through his writing, advising, and his teaching. He previously served as the chair of environmental studies at Antioch University in New England, where he founded the interdisciplinary studies doctoral program and then served as president at Unity College in Maine. He's since serves in advisory positions for the American Association for Sustainability in Higher Education and other organizations, and consulted with over 60 institutions, now including this one. Dr. Thomashow has also written several books about environmental education, including The 9 Elements of Sustainable Campus, and most recently, and what this lecture is going to be circled around, To Know the World. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Mitchell Thomashow.
Well, wow, it is really great to be here. I am so excited. It's been a while since I've given a talk like this because of COVID. I had this book come out and I did many presentations, but they were all on Zoom, which is cold, and this is warm. It's great to be with you all. I've had a terrific week. Cincinnati is amazing, you know that. But I'm blown away at the cultural, historical, ecological significance of this place. It's really interesting. It feels like there are just layers upon layers to explore and understand. And as a newcomer to the city, I'm really intrigued. It's really an interesting place. And I've had a great week here. The people I've met have been amazing. I've never met a faculty that wasn't full of themselves, like, you know. And you folks, the faculty here are great. I mean, the spirit, you know, the idea of sharing, the ones I've met have been amazing. I had 2 hours with students today that just absolutely blew my mind. I told them when I was done, I feel like I want to cry tears of joy at how hopeful I feel after spending time with them. It's just really inspiring. I've had an old friend, 2 old friends I've seen, including John Talmadge, author of Cincinnati Arch. I wouldn't have seen him if it wasn't for the invite here. So it's really been a terrific week. A lot of fun, and I've learned a tremendous amount from everyone I've been exposed to. I'm really grateful to be here. I'm at the stage of life in my mid-70s where, you know, things do slow down for you. And to have the opportunity to get back in action and to do the stuff I love to do is very much revitalizing. As long as I know I can take a month off and go to the desert after this. It's really just fine. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about the future of environmental learning. And there are many things I can talk about. I've talked a lot about sustainability this week to different audiences. The book, The 9 Elements of a Sustainable Campus, covers a lot of that. I'm going to briefly explore my career with you so you understand how I got to this point and why I'm here and what I do and why I do it. But in short, my view and the reason why I wrote this book is, you know what? I forgot to do something I really want to do. And that is, how many of you are students? Please raise your hand. Well, that's a good turnout. You're supposed to be getting extra credit, right? Right? Isn't that right, Amy, wherever you are? Yeah, all right. How many faculty are here? That's great. People from the city of Cincinnati? Community organizations? Well, I think we're about a third. Anyone from outside this area? Just happen to be, you know, wandering through? There's a special talk tonight, you know, discounted seats, nothing like that. The New Yorker in me is coming out, although I do live in New Hampshire now. What was I saying? So I'm going to go through a little bit of what I've done and how it led to this book, but the take-home message really is for me this, right now. And I feel that when I was in college in the late 60s at New York University, there wasn't a single environmental studies course in the entire catalog. And there was no place you could study ecology somewhere, or you could go to a forestry school, but there was no environmental studies. So my whole career, and the career of many folks in my generation, was to build the field. We now have a statured field of environmental studies. We have many organizations like ACE and SED, and if you don't know those, I'm not going to go through all that, because otherwise I'll never get started on the talk. But there are so many great organizations and things that are happening now. But here's my worry. As soon as a field gets statured, it loses its boldness. And this field changes so quickly that we always have to be on the edge of it in order to do the right thing, in order to teach well, in order to meet the needs of a new generation of students, in order to develop the leaders that we need. So the whole point of this book is to say, here's where I think environmental studies ought to go. Now, it's not like I have the answer, because I don't. I have a few suggestions. I wrote a whole book about those suggestions, but the whole spirit of this book is to have the reader do the same thing for herself. And that is, there are a lot of activities in the book that say, well, think about what this means for you. Where do you take all of this? What does it mean for your institution? What does it mean for your organization? What does it mean for your life, really? That's the point. How do we live this? Not just, you know. So, the first thing I want to do is give yet another shout out to these people, because they brought me here. And I'm really grateful for that. And the energy, I tried to study the university and the city as much as I could before I got here. And there's a lot to study, a lot to learn about. I had some great conversations with folks like Oliver and Kroner and Ryan Mooney Bullock, who were both here. Ryan was a student at Antioch back in the day when I was there, and many of the faculty as well. And then I looked at all the videos of the What is Sustainability videos on the pews. That's how you say it, pews. There's so many of these, you know. C's, pews, okay. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. They were amazing. They were so spirited. I looked at these faculty and said, wow, what great people. They're leaders. And here's what they understand. And this is what's so rare to have folks in philosophy doing this. They understand that their work is meaningless unless it's out there in the community and unless it affects their own lives. And I heard your Vice President for Research say this yesterday, and I heard the folks at Pew say it, and congratulations. I think with that spirit and that attitude, you should do great things. So I'm very excited to be able to support what you're doing, and I want to thank Angela, who's an amazing, not only a statured and fine academic, but also an amazing connector for bringing me here. Thank you very much. Okay, so I've written 5 books, actually. 3 of them are shown here. The first book I wrote was called Ecological Identity, and this is my book that's best known, and this was back in 1995. And the whole idea of this book was, I was fascinated. I was working with environmental studies graduate students in Antioch, New England, and I was fascinated, why do these people do this? And I realized that for them, it's a way of life. It's a way to create a new identity for themselves. So this book is about, well, when you have this new identity, how does it change the way you think about politics? How does it change the way you think about spirituality? How does it change the way you think about the natural world? This book, like all my books, are filled with activities that people can do. Hands-on things like sense of place maps and ways for people to develop their own theories and their own ideas and to empower their own thinking. A bunch of years later, I went to a conference on biodiversity. This must have been in the late 90s. And it was shortly after the term biodiversity was actually invented. And I was devastated at this conference. I had no idea that we were so deeply into the 6th mega extinction. I learned so much from the great biodiversity scientists that were there, and I thought I need to somehow address this as an educator. So I wrote a book called Bringing the Biosphere Home, and the thesis of the book essentially is this. It's through intimate awareness of local natural history that you're able to broaden your understanding of space and time. And you need to understand space and time to understand global environmental change. So this is a book on how you do that. And it also covers some of the spiritual dimensions of what happens when you get engaged in these issues, because it can be very heavy. And there needs to be ways, it needs to be uplifting as well. So Bring the Biosphere Home, which sadly is out of print. You can find it on A-Books for like, $5 or something. And then I was in Antioch, New England for 30 years, and my whole career was building this field. And then I became president of this little college in Maine, Unity College. It was a turnaround challenge. When I got there, it was, oh my, I had no idea. They didn't tell me about this. They didn't tell me about that. They didn't tell me about that. And it was one of these places that was 2 or 3 catastrophic admission cycles away from tanking. I guess it's a basketball term now, but a college can do it too. So I felt that we could do sustainability there. And I wanted to prove, and here's the interesting thing, and I write about it in this book, and eventually I'll get to the main topic of tonight's talk, but I want you to see the trajectory, the career development that led me here. I thought that the interesting thing about this college was I had board members. It wasn't a precious, foofy, left-wing environmental college. It's nothing like that at all. We were a lot of first-generation, lower middle-class students. And I had board members who were very conservative. This is before conservatism got a little out of hand. But these were people who hate taxes, love guns, but loved the natural world. They loved wilderness. They loved hunting. And then I had other board members who were really progressive. And there I was. My job was to bring them all together. And it turned out that sustainability was the way to do it. And what we did is we called it real-time, frugal sustainability. How do you do it without money? And so you grow food, you use art. I've talked a lot about this during the course of my time here, and it's not the subject of tonight's talk, but this book covers all of that, plus a whole system for how do you have a coherent, strategic, comprehensive, conceptually sound approach to sustainability that's campus-wide. And a lot of my work between 2011 and 2016 was visiting campuses and meeting with folks and talking about ways of getting that done. So that's what I did then. And now I'm going to talk about this book. And I started writing this book, I don't know, around 2018, 2019, and I had this idea that environmental studies needed something different and something new. I was at a few conferences, I followed the literature somewhat, and I feel strongly that so many of these small colleges have failed, or have been on the verge of it. Green Mountain College, an environmental college, couldn't make it happen. Their students wound up going to Prescott. Northland, Hampshire almost failed until I rediscovered Ken Burns. I mean, there are a lot of environmental studies programs that have not been able to make it happen, make it work. And there are others that have thrived. Why have some thrived and others not? Well, I think the ones that thrive are the ones that really listen to students and listen to practitioners and listen to community members and listen to what people need and how to prepare folks for the right careers that meets the changing times. So I thought, I'm going to write a book that covers all of this and covers everything else I've been thinking about all these years. And so that's what I'm going to talk with you about tonight. Now, these are the 9 chapters in the book, and what I'm really going to focus mostly on are the chapters in the middle between the tides of change and cosmopolitan bioregionalism. I'm going to touch on the last 2, but you can go on a long time with this stuff, and I want to focus on these. And then I'm going to end with some thoughts and ideas about where environmental studies could go here potentially, in partnership with the whole campus and in partnership with the city. Because this city is doing some really amazing things. And there are a lot of wonderful relationships that already exist between the university and the city, and so much more can happen in that regard, because the city is one of the great resources for the university and vice versa. And I really hope that if I were to come back here in 5 years or something like that, we'd see more of that come to fruition, because I think that's what the future of higher education ought to be. It's certainly what the future of environmental studies ought to be. It's certainly what the future of environmental justice ought to be. And there's no better place to do it than right here, right now. I guess you can say next lives here, right? Something like that. I'm an old guy, and when I was 19 years old, I went down to the 8th Street bookstore in Manhattan. I don't know if were you ever there, Arnie, but we both discovered we lived only several towns away from each other on Long Island growing up. And I saw this book, The Whole Earth Catalog. And this inspired an entire generation. This was a sustainability plan for the planet. And ever since then, I realized that my whole career has been trying to implement this in academic settings. That's what I've been trying to do. And I always want to remind folks that here we are. And there's a new book I started reading called Orbital by Samantha Harvey, where she's got all these astronauts who are on a space station, and they're looking at the Earth the whole time, and she writes about what that is. It's amazing. It's really good. I highly recommend it. Even though I've only read 6 pages of it because I've been so busy here. What the heck? Full transparency, right? But how beautiful is this? I mean, it really is something. And you can see all you can see all the weather systems, and I mean, it's just so mysterious at the same time, so magnificent. And this is what inspires us to do this work and to love this planet. But I'm not going to dwell on this. The reason why we do sustainability and the reason why we have environmental studies programs is because we are in a planetary emergency. And I'm just going to briefly review that, but not going to be a downer about it. We are, the biggest issue of all is, and it's the one that gets the least coverage, is we are full-fledged into the 6th mega extinction. As many of you know, there have been 5 during the history of life on Earth, and they've been caused for a variety of reasons. The 6th one is anthropogenic, that is, it's human-caused. And so that's a very interesting existential challenge for us to consider. But that is the big one, really, because once the species are gone, they're gone. This causes plunging declines in biodiversity, and what I like to describe as rapidly changing atmospheric and oceanic circulations, which it's a bit of a mouthful and it says more than climate change, of course, but really that's what it is. These circulations are revolving, and biogeochemical cycles are part of that. The one we're most familiar with, of course, is carbon, because it's the most easily measured in some respects. That's why we have these carbon reduction limits and everything else. Colleges can account that. There's a lot of accounting that goes into all of this work, but we shouldn't overly focus on accounting either. So this is why we do it, and it's a reminder, and I need to say it. But here's the thing, and I think that now, if you're under 30, you figured this out already, and if you're under 40, you probably have, but those of us in my generation are coming a little slowly to it, but we're figuring it out too. And that is that environmental concerns are connected to economic opportunity, social justice, healthcare, racism, violent conflict, global poverty, etc. But the connections between these issues and the ecological fate of the planet are not easily perceived. So my question then becomes, and it's a question for anyone who's here, students, faculty, community members, what is the role of environmental studies in making those connections more clear? I think that question ought to be front and center. And we've seen, especially in activist circles, we've seen a real interesting orientation around environmental justice. And if you go to activist organizations in cities around the country, they're often staffed by people from communities of color and women. That's what the demographic is. And it needs to be said and it needs to be understood. So there are these 4 conditions, and these are questions to ask that I think every environmental studies student ought to ask, that every organization ought to ask, that every citizen on this planet ought to ask. And here they are. 1, the rapacious exploitation of the biosphere and its life systems. How do we best communicate the necessity of ecosystem thinking? Now, for a long time, that's all environmental people thought about. The conditions 2, 3, and 4, which I'll go over, that's for somebody else to do. We don't do that at Sierra Club. We don't do that at Nature Conservancy. That's for another organization. That's changed, by the way. Nature Conservancy is doing amazing work in communities. Everyone has figured out that this is the way to go. 2, the increasing disparity between rich and poor. How do we promote economic equity and social justice and cultures of materialism and entitlement? That's a pretty big problem, isn't it? It's a pretty big issue in the United States of America. And you can't look at number 1 without looking at number 2. And if you do, then you're not doing the work. Number 3, the apprehension concerning the integration and separation of global cultures. How do we promote intercultural understanding and cosmopolitan thinking in the midst of nationalist responses and ethnic chauvinism? Well, you just need to open the newspaper and look at that one. I mean, it's pretty bad. And we need to do everything we can to overcome this predisposition to be tribal. And that's where educators come in. Because we all have it in us. We do. But we can overcome it. And there's a lot of work that has to happen right here. Same thing. I mean, if you look at the wars that have been going on in the Mideast and in Ukraine, and you look at number 1, what is the climate impact of the latest bombing run? I mean, for goodness sake, a lot more than whether you used a plastic bottle or not. It's fine to understand that too, but really. Number 4, violence, weapons, and terror compete with deliberation, diplomacy, and collaboration. How do we settle our differences through community democracy, compromise, and service in the midst of conflict, extreme behavior, and fear? All connected. You can't do one without the other. People who used to be mostly interested in 2, 3, and 4 better be interested in 1, 2, because otherwise we're not going to make it, and vice versa. So I think any environmental studies program has to understand this, and any community member has to understand this if we're going to really work together and move forward. It's really hard. These are really, really hard questions. And they're going to take everything we've got, our best thinking, our best imagination, our best ability to be patient and also bold. I used to talk about, in leadership at Unity, the balance between urgency and patience. It's very hard to understand. Because we know how urgent these issues are, but you can't go faster than people are capable of going either. So I used to say as a leader, you find out what the capacity for change is in an institution, and then you push people just a little bit harder than that. Because if you push too hard, you're out. And if you push too slow, you're lost. So very interesting kinds of questions, but that's for another time. And there are these trends that impact the future of environmental learning. This is an urban planet. If you look at demographics, James, between 1950 and 2050, you look at the data. When I was born in 1950, this planet, I don't remember the exact percentages, was about 20%, 25% urban. And if you look at projections for 1980, it's going to be 80% urban. So in my lifetime, essentially, I don't know if I'll live to be 100, I hope I do, that's going to be quite something. And if you're not focused on urban planet, and what an opportunity for the new SEAS program in the city of Cincinnati to have a rockin', chillin' and thrillin' urban ecology, environmental justice oriented suite of programs throughout campus and throughout the city. Ecological equity and social justice, information networks and the new cognitive orientations, more on that in a minute, because if you grow up now, you're growing up in a very different perceptual environment than if you grew up way back when I did in the late 1950s, 60s. And then the relationship between openness and vigilance, interesting challenge with the rise of authoritarian potentials. because we need to be as open as possible to diverse points of view, but also understand there are some people out there who really don't care about that and will do everything they can to kick your butt. So that's a tough balance. It's a really, really tough balance, to be patient and be compassionate and be kind, but also be vigilant. I wish it wasn't that way, but it is. And we all know this. So I asked the question early in the book, and to you, is the Anthropocene, which I guess reveals a little bit of my 60s background, is the Anthropocene blowing your mind? It's blowing mine. This is my son who's a mural artist. He did this many years ago in Cambridge. It's a depiction of rising seas on the Atlantic coast. You got great public art in this town, by the way. I would love to see more public art that concerns environmental justice and environmental equity issues. You can do it here. You got some really good public art. I mean, I wanted to take pictures for my son all over the place. They were really great things. Okay, so what is the Anthropocene? A big word that people use. Well, these words are political, by the way, just like biodiversity was coined as a political word to wake people up to these relationships. Did that work? Well, not really, but that's okay. Well, the Anthropocene is a political word as well. The idea among some scientists was, well, we need to make the point that the human impact on the environment is such now that it represents a new geological era. Well, there's a certain amount of hubris in saying that, but I don't need to parse the academic reliability of a notion like that. That doesn't really matter to me. The point of the matter is things are moving really fast, right? And whenever you want to date the Anthropocene, was it 16 with the invention of the steam engine? I don't know. But here's the thing that I think is going on, and I think it's two things simultaneously. It's the global extraction of natural resources, and this is not often stated, and it's the intensity of electronic connectivity. Because you can't have this rapid extraction of resources without this kind of connectivity. AI, by the way, there are a lot of books that are breaking the news on AI, and what AI means in terms of climate impact, oh my goodness. Because you don't see a lot of these sorts of things. But these are all part of the same challenge that we have. And I'm looking at it not only from a extraction of resources point of view, but also a cognitive point of view. So what happens when you spend all your time doing this? I mean, you walk down the street where this happens, and you gotta make sure. I can't. If I fall, it's not good. So you gotta watch out for that. And what does it say about how a person sees the world when everything is framed within that little box? So we're dealing with that too. And I write about this in all my books, and Bring the Biosphere Home, but I write about it in this one as well. So how do we reclaim autonomy in this time of global transformation? And I think, by the way, that although I feel it's misguided and subject to demagoguery, I think that the extreme right is asking that question as well. How do we reclaim autonomy? It's just very confusing. And this could be a time of human awakening. We have the capacity with our instrumentation and our awareness and all the great intellectual knowledge that we have to make this a time of human awakening. This is a Roz Chast little thing, that this proof of life on Earth, and it's an interesting kind of silly contemporary archaeology. But here's the other point I want to make. I can sit in my office on the upper left there and look at my screen, and that's what the world is. You've all been there, and everything is just telescoped in. You can go surfing for a while. And you go from place to place to place. You think it's your own volition, but it may not be. You're being guided all the time in various ways. And at a point, okay, stop and remember who you are. Remember where you are, and remember what really matters, and get off this, because it's addictive. It really is. And you get off it, and I look in my room, it's my study there, out in the woods of New Hampshire, and I look at all those books, and these things are all portals. Every book is a portal to another world. Every book is a memory of something I was once thinking about. And then I realized, well, that's another, not distraction, but that's another framing where you're in the book. So I go outside, and it's spring. I mean, it was really spring. And I go outside, and the whole world opens up again. It just opens up again. It's like there's something called forest bathing, and I don't know so much about that, but you feel like you're back in your body, you're back in the planet. By the way, you don't have to live in the woods of New Hampshire to do this. You can do it anywhere you are. This is the middle of the city. Just remember that you live in the natural world in the biosphere. And so I feel that, and this is more of my son's art, that humans looking back on what they've wrought, I believe in something called the deliberate pause, and I think that needs to be part of teaching, where you're constantly reminding people, how do you take breaks? How do you use your everyday life to remember your relationship to the planet, or your relationship to the block you live on, or any of these kinds of things, whatever matters most. So I have lots of activities in the book that describe ways of regaining the deliberate pause, so you're not imprisoned. And the reason why we do this is so that we can reconnect with our evolutionary predisposition to be bodies in this planet. One of the issues that I think is really crucial for higher ed, for any education, K through 12, you name it, is what I call constructive connectivity. I don't know, does anyone have any idea what this is a picture of? It's the Golden Spike, it's the Transcontinental Railroad, it's where East meets West. When does this happen? Does anyone know when this happens? 1867. Correct. What else happens around then? Well, the Civil War is just over, wasn't it? Charles Darwin was doing his thing. Right? So before this, if you wanted to get, you know, you can go on horse, I guess, but if you wanted to ship a lot of goods from New York to San Francisco, you had to go all the way around. Now, you didn't have to do that anymore, and it opened up commerce, and it was a networking transformation, a networking transportation transformation, really crucial moment. By the way, it's a pretty sordid history if you look at the origins and building of the Transcontinental Railroad in terms of exploiting labor of various types, and of course, not to mention the ubiquitous taking over of native tribal lands. But that's not taught in schools, and a lot of people don't want it to be taught, but this is real important conceptually to me, because it paves the way for these transportation networks, pave the way for our understanding of these electronic communication networks. And why is this important? Well, what I do in this book is everything starts with the biosphere. Everything starts with an ecological template. So let's look at all the networks that surround us. So we've got dendritic drainage, a geomorphological term. Fluvial geomorphology talks about dendritic drainage. We have tree roots. We have mycelium, the substrate of everything. As Paul Stamets, the mushroom visionary, describes it, the original internet, or the mycelial networks. Go walk any forest, go walk anywhere, and there are mycelial relationships that nourish everything, right? We have a lot, we don't know anything about it, by the way. I mean, think about the number of soil scientists or mycelial scientists compared to the number of, let's say, lawyers. And I don't know, I've never done the math. This is a great math challenge. What's the ratio between lawyers and soil scientists? It's 100,000 to 1? I don't know. It's pretty incredible, though, when you think about it that way, right? And this is so important. We have to understand this stuff because it helps us survive on the planet. Anyhow, so I think that we need to understand that all the networking that we do is part of cosmic and biosphere patterns of relationship that it's important to know about. It also includes, I mean, the more you look at it, the better it gets. I'm not going to spend too much time on this now, but you get the picture. By the way, one of the growing fields of ecological theory is networks, and understanding networks not only in space, but networks in time. Because it turns out that depending on what time you're looking at a network, very different things are happening. There are very different exchanges and very different species interactions, depending on what time you're looking at it. So these ecological relationships are really interesting, and we're like little babies trying to figure this stuff out. I mean, we're just beginning to do this. I mean, for goodness sake, theory of evolution's, what, about 100 and what years old, 160 years old? Some people still don't get it. I mean, that's really something. So there's a lot here, but I'm not going to get too much into it. And then the networks of species is just absolutely remarkable. Now, this is all going to lead to something. It's going to lead to two things. We have other networks. We have the information grid, electronic transmission networks. We could sit here right now and think about, well, what powers this room? What are all the networks that help us get here? Either way, the book has a bunch of activities on thinking about these kinds of networks, which I think are very helpful to do. They're also very beautiful to look at. There's a guy named, what's his name, who's done some really beautiful stuff with network visualization, visual communication of things. But here's the thing. The ecological template of looking at networks helps us better understand social networks. And we have to understand social networks because all of our kids grow up. I mean, it doesn't take long. You know, if you're a parent, it's hard to keep them away. I mean, you do the best you can, but it's really hard. And they're just getting, my daughter's a school teacher, she understands all these things, but you know, it's a lot easier when you're a single mom and you've got 2 kids to give them an iPad for an hour. And they figure out how to do it real fast. So there are 2 things about that. One is they're really easily preyed upon, and I've seen it happen with my granddaughters, 1. And 2, they really have a deeper understanding than many of us who are older will ever have about how to use these things. And we don't take advantage of teaching about it. We don't take advantage of teaching about how to source information. Where does your news, for example, come from? How does it get to you? There's so much we can do with network analysis or social networks. So we know, for example, that from social network analysis, that most of us are inclined to participate in what are called homological networks. Homological networks are networks of people who are like you. But we also know that organizations that have folks who are nodes in multiple networks are more successful, and that includes college campuses. That's why I think it's really important to stress the relationship between community and college and university, because the more robust your networks are, the more you're going to learn. And this is just true. So how do we teach about this? Now, you'd be hard-pressed to find a college or to find a gen ed curriculum, folks, where freshmen are immediately taught about and asked for their ideas about how do we think about networks. And it really needs to get done. It really does, because you know why. You read the news. Okay, so social network analysis is really cool. I just Googled social networks on Google Images, and this is what we came up with. But I like doing exercises like this, where I ask folks in an organization to create network maps and look at them, and for every individual in the organization, and then combine them together and ask the question, well, where are your networks most robust? And where are they lacking? And by the way, very often they're lacking in terms of access and relationships to communities of color and issues related to equity. Just look at the wonderful climate equity indicators report Carly Trott put together for the city and the University of Cincinnati. I mean, this is the stuff that you can learn by doing this, and I think it needs to be front and center in how we think about environmental learning. You look at some of the network, and this is a map that looks at the relationship between Cincinnati and other cities. This is some of the organizations. I asked Ryan if she had a map that depicted the incredible number of members of Green Umbrella, and someone ought to be doing this, and apparently someone is. But this is very interesting. It's empowering to see this kind of thing. This is what I mean by constructive connectivity. You use the power of network analysis to learn, and we have to teach this. But more on that a little bit later. So here are some UC challenges. University of Cincinnati challenges for constructive connectivity. And pardon my presumption, because I kind of try to figure this out before I even got here. Network visualization of environmental studies, climate and sustainability courses, research projects, and the connections between them. Do something like that, and you say, holy cow, we've got a lot going on here. How can we make it better? How can we make it even more robust? Network visualizations of ES, climate, and sustainability connections and partnerships with Greater Cincinnati. There's 3 here, in a way. There's one for the university, there's one for the city, and there's one on the relationship between the university and the city. I think there's a lot to be learned from doing that sort of thing. And then asking questions about how can we do better? Who are we leaving out? Who do we want to include? Another, network assessment for community engagement is a 4th. Network assessment of funding and revenue sources, social capital of UC alumni, mapping campus sustainability discusses onward and onward and onward. I mean, this is just me looking you over a little bit and saying, oh, here are some places that network visualization might really work out really well. And you could probably think of dozens more. Great classroom things, by the way, adapted for various types of teaching. I think the biggest issue of our time that brings all of this together is migration. It's one of the most painful issues in American public life because it's where everything comes together. It's where race and equity and belonging and inclusion all hit the road. And it's so subject and susceptible to demagoguery. I want to see programs that teach about the relationship between climate, migration, and public health, for example. No one that I know of is doing that. And that is really important. You go ask anybody about this. This is what has to happen. So, you know, these could be people like us. And if you look at the numbers of people who move around the world at any given time, it's really staggering. And migrations, though, in contrast to the propaganda, are a biospheric phenomenon. I mean, you know, people have been, look at the next map. I mean, look at where people came from to come here and what they did when they got here. That's why all the decolonial stuff is so important and so powerful. And then they say, well, you can't come. Well, why can't you come? You kicked us out. I mean, it's really something. And all of these maps are incredible. It's not just not North America, but it's the whole world. We settled the world pretty fast. You know, by some miracle, 20,000 or so of our ancestors got out of Africa. And then they covered this planet real fast, a couple 100,000 years. Man, isn't that something? I mean, you could do some of those genomes. My family was in the Middle East, and part of them hit the Mediterranean, and then part went east, and then over the Urals, and here I am. The interesting thing about this work is you need to go only back 3 or 4 generations, and you realize how incredibly connected everyone is. I did this with a real interesting, diverse class, and you don't need to go far back before you find people who have relatives who were slaves, or who were in the Holocaust, or who were a part of the Irish potato famine, or who knows what. And it's a very, very interesting thing to do to bring people together, is to have them do migration maps. And then we have all these walls around the world. Now, walls are not a new thing. We have the Great Wall of China. This is a map of current walls, a few pictures of them. And walls are, I mean, they're comical from an ecological point of view. I mean, they're the essence of ephemerality. Now, I'm not saying that there have to be rules about the movement of people from one place to another, but we're really screwed up about borders. And I think it's very helpful to think about what ecological borders are, which are pretty permeable, and to think about human constructed borders, which for the most part aren't. And that's a real big conceptual challenge, which I think is a very interesting thing to teach. So it's not only migration from one place to another, but it's displacements within a country. So think of all the displacements we've had in the United States as a result of, let's say, Katrina, or forest fires, or urban gentrification. That's a displacement that results in people having to move from one place to another. This is a big, big problem that needs study. Maybe you folks are the ones who will do it. Because you've got a city that's going to be on the front lines at some point, if it's not already. Continents migrate. Pretty amazing that humans figured that out, huh? They haven't known this for that long. It was in 1910, Wegener wrote The Origins of Continents and Oceans, or something like that. And it's pretty incredible. They just all move around all the time. That's why we have earthquakes. It's something. Birds do. I mean, what are those pelagic albatrosses cover 10,000 miles so they can find sources of food? What's so weird about humans moving back and forth? The next time you fly and you pick up your luggage, think about all the carousels in the world that are moving luggage around. And tell me humans don't move around a lot. It's really something. Look at these wonderful phenology maps. Phenology is the study of the changing of seasons. So everything's moving all the time, and it really is helpful to understand it, because understanding the movement of species helps us understand the movement of humans. Biogeographical change as a result of climate. You know, any of these slides, by the way, is a story of take many moments to explore, but we're not going to do that. This is the movement of Africans, the forced migration, the forced diaspora, and so on. Okay, that's all I'm going to do on this one, other than to say very often and increasingly, these migrations wind up being people like you and I, who, for no fault of our own, are forced to move. But more often than not, they come from communities that are not able to do anything else, can't buy themselves out of it. So there's where the equity issue and the race issue comes in as well. Okay, Katrina's exodus and so on. I'm not going to do this one right now. There are so many great books on migration. I cover it in a chapter in my book, but man, there are entire books that are just wonderful. One from Other Sons is Isabel Wilkerson's wonderful book about the African-American diaspora and migration within this country. The Next Great Migration by Sonia Shaw is an amazing book. It's a great book. It also points out a lot of the incipient racism in population theory. I highly recommend it. National Geographic's done some great things. There are all kinds of organizations working on this, and there are organizations everywhere that care about it. Here's another one of my pet peeves. Say this right now. If you follow the mainstream news media, whatever it is you follow, whether it's Fox News or MSNBC or CNN or the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Guardian, you'd be really hard-pressed to find one article in any day that talks about really something really good that's happening in terms of a community activism point of view. There are a lot of articles about fear and about bad things that happen. There are great things that happen everywhere. And I don't want to sound like some kind of Pollyannish jerk, right? But I know this for a fact. In the city of Cincinnati, you can throw a rock and find a social service organization that's doing really good work, or an environmental organization that's doing really good work. You can go to any city, you can go to any rural community, and you find these, but they're not covered. And our job is to promote them. And our job is to have students who go and work for these organizations, because they're out there and they do great things and they want you. They want you very much, and they want the training that we can provide. And this is my limited attempt, in a way, to say, here's some of the training that I think matters. And that's where we're headed here. So, there's a lot of refugee curriculum. There is the refugee experience, which came out of Miami University. There's the climate migration in Cincinnati work that's happened. Thank you, Oliver, for letting me know about this. There's some really good things that are happening. I have this other concept, cosmopolitan bioregionalism, and by that I mean that I'm very much impacted by the importance of place and the meaning of place. And there was a movement in the 80s called bioregionalism, which talks about how political boundaries ought to be determined by how we think about place and ecological criteria. The permaculture guy's shaking his head. And that's really important stuff. But what does it say about cities? Well, cities are bioregional centers as well. And what I mean by cosmopolitan bioregionalism is that you have to think about this as a way of connection and not a way of separation. Because place can also be a way to keep people out, and often is. But place for me is a way to include people and to think about all the interconnections. And the first place you start, of course, is thinking about who lived here before you did, and what their lives were like, and what their civilization was like, and what we can learn from them, and how much they understood about the natural world. Not to romanticize these groups. I mean, they were indigenous populations, they owned slaves too. So, let's get real about the whole thing, but let's learn from it. Because there's a lot to learn. There's a wonderful book called The Dawn of Everything by an anthropologist and a historian, which actually goes through many different cultures and looks at the ones that had forms of democracy. This would be good for you to look at, Eduardo, at some point, because it shows forms of democracy that go back in time. Because we always assume, well, it comes out of the Enlightenment. No, it doesn't come out of the Enlightenment. It comes from lots of different places. Okay, so that's that. And there are examples, by the way, of indigenous populations that have done extraordinary work. The Haida Gwaii lesson by Mark Dowie talks about what's happening in Haida Gwaii and how the autonomy that they've been able to develop in relationship to Canada. I've done a lot of work. I wrote another book, which I'm happy to send you as a PDF, called Pacific Northwest Changemakers, that looks at multi-generational and multicultural sustainability, non-campus sustainability projects in the Pacific Northwest. They're all over the place. I profiled 8. I could have profiled hundreds of them. That's what I'm saying. They're all there. They're all happening. It's great. We need to know. We need to be uplifted every once in a while, not live in fear of the election, although it's dangerous. This is a cosmopolitan continent. Way before European settlers came here, there was trade going on, back and forth, around and about. All the different language groups. Many knew about each other. Cosmopolitanism isn't new to our generation or new to cities or new to the Western world. It goes a long way back. Again, I'm not going to cover all these things. Someone did a frivolous, broke our country up into bioregional republics. What would it look like? Fun exercise, by the way, for teaching. I love this. Just a reminder of what cosmopolitan culture means and how enriching it is. When I was at Unity College and president, obviously everyone, wanted us to become more diverse, and that was very challenging because there were no communities. You have to bring lots of people in at the same time. And the reasoning always seemed off to me. To me, the reasoning is, well, we do this, yes, to provide opportunity, but because you're robbing people of a good education if they're not exposed to diverse peoples and diverse points of view. So that's what we did. Anyway, there's a lot of good stuff that goes on in that regard. And these are some wonderful books, by the way, about cities and what you can do. I love Manhattan. I don't know if you know this book, Oliver, but this is a book of what Manhattan looked like before European settlement. And man, it's amazing. And it's a reconstruction and a revitalization of the landscape back then. Check it out, it's really great. There's so many resources this way. Benjamin Barber wrote a wonderful book some years ago, If Mayors Ruled the World. And he's now deceased. He's a really interesting political theorist. Essentially, his thesis was that nation states really can't get things done anymore, but principalities can. Cities can. And that's another really important reason for cities and universities to work together, if you need another one. And I really think the role of art, ecological, I love Hundertwasser. You can make it so cool. That's why I love public art so much. Man, you just drive downtown and there were some amazing murals. I really wanted to spend some time kind of living in those murals. There are so many of them. I'd love to see them on this campus. I think that'd be so cool. You have a contest of murals. But place really matters a lot, and place is very closely related to sensibility. And that's what we're talking about with Cincinnati. And look, this is a great thing. The University of Cincinnati's, by the way, of course, there's one for Green Cincinnati and all that. I don't think I have a slide of it, but this is a terrific document. This is a document about place and why place matters and the interconnections between this place and the rest of the world. That's what this is. It's all here. It's all been done. It's just a matter of maximizing it and moving it forward. And here's you've got these place-based community action projects in your university. It's great to see. And of course, the Climate Equity Indicators report. So here's what I talk about what I call improvisational excellence in the book. There's a whole chapter. I'm not going to get into it. And what I mean by that is really how do you adapt to a variety of different circumstances. And one of the great passions of my life have been basketball, jazz, and games and sports. And the reason why is because it's all about improvisation. It's all about thinking on your feet. And I think that's true of environmental learning as well, because environmental change is always demanding a different kind of response. So really good teaching prepares students to do that kind of thing. So I get into that in the book. I also talk about what I mean by perceptual reciprocity, and by that, in brief, is I think everything on this planet perceives. That doesn't mean it's sentient. But you walk outside and there's a tree is perceiving. It doesn't mean it's going to have a conversation with you, or if you hug it, it's going to hug you back. But what it means is that there's a complicated matrix of relationships out there that we're not privy to, and we ought to be, and we ought to teach about that. And it doesn't have to be woo-woo. It could be science-based. There's a lot of science is moving in this direction right now, by the way. A lot of people are writing about this from a scientific perspective. There's a lot of exercises and activities in the book, if you're a teacher or not, or you're just a citizen and want to think about these things in more depth. So here's where I'm going to end. I think we need a new generation of environmental practitioners. And I'm not going to read this to you, you can read it yourself. And what do I mean by that? And this is not to say to you, James, or to you, Amy, this is what you have to do. Not that you'd listen to me saying that anyway. As much as it is to throw some ideas out there, throw some seeds out for seeds. And I'd love to see, it doesn't only have to be environmental studies, it can come from anywhere. I'd love to see modules where people are prepared for what the workplace really needs in relationship to a good environmental science, environmental studies education, which I hope includes some of the things I talked about today. But here's what I mean. And by the way, here's a nice list of some of the courses you've got. The more you curate this, there's a lot of curation needed here for both the city and the university. The more you curate all the things that are happening, the more cohesiveness there is. There's one takeaway for me from this week is how do you build cohesion and integration amongst all the fantastic things that are going on. Okay, well, we need sustainability advocates, of course. We need social entrepreneurs. Man, the students I met today, where are you guys? People who I saw earlier. There they are. These people are social entrepreneurs. They're amazing. And they understand what it means to build things and how you move it forward. And we got people from engineering, people doing business stuff, and people doing doing real estate and urban agriculture. I mean, it's really cool. You ask the students what they're doing, and they may have a major, but then there's everything else they do. And they know. They know where to go, and they know where to find, especially the environmental studies sustainability people, or the ones who come to environmental sustainability from engineering or wherever else they may be coming from. So we need social entrepreneurs. Can you have like 9 to 12 credit modules where people learn about social entrepreneurship, or they have co-ops where they do it, and you combine that with the other things that they learn? How about ecological retail and marketing? There's another opening, another really interesting possibility. We need people in those fields who really understand what they're talking about. New media innovators, which includes bloggers. You know what's happening now with writers is that because the publishing world is crazy, it is. I mean, it's really tipsy-turvy and upside down. If you're an academic, good luck. Maybe you'll find a university press and you'll sell 500 copies. But man, it's a tough situation right now. So what a lot of people are doing is they set up their own blogs, and they charge like $5 or $10 a month to get the newsletter delivered to you. Now, it doesn't have to be that. It could be free, I suppose, but that's how they're learning a living. But if you know how to run blogs, and if you know how to be an information designer and do network visualization, and you know how to be a graphic facilitator, and you knock on the door of an environmental organization or some city organization, wow, they can use you. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. These are great skills. And then, anyone goes to an environmental studies program and they get the same stuff. But what will differentiate them is that they get these kinds of things. So here are some of the other examples. Game designers. That's big stuff. It's big time right now. People who do ecological game design, that really matters, that really teaches about environment. One of the best-selling games of the last decade is a game called Wingspan. It's a nice game. It's marginally teaches you something about environment. Not really, a little bit maybe. It's pretty birds and eggs. But how about games that really teach about that stuff? It could be video games. I don't do video games, but it could be that as well. Creative interpreters. That's the other big area. It's a big takeaway from me looking here. There could be so much interpretive signage everywhere on this campus in relationship to sustainability initiatives, in relationship to the natural world. It's really wide open, very possible, very inexpensive to do. People who are curators. That's what we talked about when we had our meeting with vice presidents and people from the city the other day. How do you curate this and put it in one place and really centralize it so people know where to go and what to do and they can connect together? This is a skill. This is a skill that can be taught and learned. And most people learn this on their own. So you can say, well, what do they have to go to college for? Because they can do it better that way when it's organized by people who know what they're doing and they can practice it and get mentoring. People who know, and Ryan brought this out the other day, people who know how to run conversations, facilitate conversations. You think that's easy? You have to learn how to do that. A lot of teachers can't do that. You know that. And you know that you had to learn how to do it. They didn't teach you that in graduate school, for the most part, or how to collaborate. But you can do that here. And you can be a difference maker just by doing these kinds of things. Information design, graphic facilitation, of course, community planners, social venture philanthropists. Another big, wide open field, learning how to do social venture philanthropy. They're putting people with foundations that are doing this kind of work. Curriculum designers, of course, teachers and learners, healing professionals who really understand the natural world as well. Mural artists, I'm biased there, but it is another very powerful way. And there are so many potential institutional collaborators and partners who really make work and life and studying meaningful. So I'm going back to this slide, which is some of the partners, and there are many more than are listed here, but just to say what a resource this is. And I bet if you asked these people and you showed that list of things, they could pick and choose and say, yeah, that one matters, that one matters, that one matters. And then after that, you figure out what your curriculum is. So I've run my course. And if you want to learn more about me and all the silly things I do, then you just go to my website. And if you want to write to me, I sit up by myself in the hills a lot with my wife and all the birds outside. But I respond. I love being in touch with people. So if you want to contact me for any reason whatsoever, please do. I will get back to you. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you for coming to town and sharing your ideas. I've been an educator since '76, and I still teach part-time at a private school. And my feeling is that a lot of what you're talking about should also carry over to teacher education. Because if we don't really start engaging the youngest people of our culture, of our societies, to truly understand their connection to the world and how they impact the world because of the decisions that they make in terms of where they throw their trash or how much they really want to have something, the need to have the consumerism that is just out of control, in my opinion. I just think that's so important. So have you professionally kind of tried to get some of your ideas percolating within teacher education programs around the country?
Okay. What's your name?
Susan Farber. I have a
Susan.
doctorate from this institution in education.
All right. Thank you, Susan. That's great. That's a great point. I could answer that question, but Andrew, would you like to try? Huh? Am I putting you on the spot too much?
Sure. Hi, Susan, was it? Andrew, hi. Very serendipitous. I am in the Teachers College. I teach teachers. And, I fight for space to include some of these things, but it is probably one of the most, dare I say, politically fraught and antiquated programs, not just here, but around. The means in which we prepare our educators to inform young minds has not evolved very quickly, but these are the cornerstones and foundations that we are trying to implement. But, the education system was originally designed to make workers for the Industrial Revolution. And structurally speaking, it's still for that front. So we're trying. Yep.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for allowing me to put you on the spot that way. Yeah, please. Well, you have a teacher-trainer background, and I have something. Of course, I have something to say too. But you go first, Ryan.
Well, I was just going to give a shout out. The department that Mitchell ran at Antioch, New England, had as a part of the environmental studies department a teacher certification program, which is what brought me to that school. And an amazing, I would say, very out of the box master's program that was really grounded in ecology and totally different ways of teaching. So it exists, at least in some places. Small numbers of teachers going through that program every year because it's a small school, but I think the model is there.
There are teachers all over New England who were trained there and went through it and then trained their own teachers. But I want to tell you a little story about my daughter. That's what you do, right? And she's a 3rd and 4th grade teacher in Seattle schools. And she realized early on in her teaching that kids they were really uncomfortable speaking directly to each other. So she has an exercise she does every morning in which, she says every single morning, I went to her classroom and the kids all take a name out of a hat. And, Sarah will take Jimmy's name out. And what'll happen is Sarah will go up to Jimmy and say, "How are you, Jimmy? How are you doing this morning?" And Sarah has to look Jimmy right in the eye. And they have to have direct contact. And that might seem like, oh, what's the big deal? But it's really important. So the reason why I'm telling you that story is not only because I'm proud of Jess, but because there are a lot of ways to teach human interaction, and there are a lot of things that you can do that aren't necessarily subject to the book banners, or the uptight ones, right, who think it ought to be some other way. And that's how and one of the things we taught at Antioch, Antioch, New England, and New Hampshire in the old days was live free or die, and very conservative state. It's a blue state now, thank goodness. Sorry to reveal my political preference if you didn't know already. But we had to figure out ways of getting accredited when we were doing all these out-of-the-box things. And anyone who's in an alternative institution is faced with a tremendous amount of skepticism. So you figure out ways of using the language of the accreditors, whoever they may be, and giving it back to them, and then doing it in a way that makes sense, but is also really transformational. Is that a little bit naive? Well, of course. But it does work, too. It really does. My message to educators is stay naive.
That's a nice segue, actually. I noticed, well, first, thank you for your talk.
And who are you?
My name is Julia Carlson. I'm in the English department.
Okay.
I noticed at the end you skipped quite quickly over the slide that said writers and critics.
Who prophesize with your pen?
And I would like you to expand on that a bit more, but could I suggest, too, that part of one of these elements for a sustainable campus might be literary historians? And I'm thinking about your diagnosis of our condition and your nice phrase, the dynamic reconditioning of perceptual awareness that we're undergoing because of our attachment to digital media. And 200 years ago, William Wordsworth, a poet I've written about, diagnosed during this age of media shift, print is saturating the culture, and the circulation of news is changing the way people are consuming information. And he said, there's a problem. We're living in this rapid, fast-paced society, and we're not paying attention to the natural world. And he developed a poetics that encouraged attention to what's beyond the page. You were saying what's beyond the phone, the cell phone. So perhaps, in addition to blogging and generating the kind of graphics that appeal to people now, we need to practice some kind of close reading and thinking about the history that's at the dawn of the Anthropocene, when Wordsworth was writing, the kinds of measures that our culture has evolved to counter this kind of perceptual dimming or blunting. So thoughts on poetics and literary history?
Yes. Well, actually, there's John Talmadge over there. And I won't put you on the spot, but I do want to point out, John is really one of the founders of the environmental humanities. We met through Orion magazine back in the day. And you know, he's written about this quite widely and done a lot of this kind of work. He's right here in Cincinnati. His book, The Cincinnati Arch, is a really good book. So, but the reason why I point that out is because, yes, that's what humanists ought to be doing, is poetry, of course. I mean, think about the way you can use poetry to maximize the learning on this campus. I mean, it's just really, you have poems here and you have poems there, or you have words scattered around. You know, a word on this tree, another word on another tree. There was a guy in the New Hampshire woods who did that for a while. You'd be walking along or driving along and see a word here, word there. Yes, I want to hear what you have to say.
Hi, I'm Kira Gong, and I'm from philosophy department. I'm a PhD student here. So the story I want to share is basically an assignment I did for one of my undergraduate courses, like 6 or 7 years ago. And this assignment is try to let the students choose a plant on the campus and go to the plant to say hi to the plant every day and take the record of observations. And like at the end of the course, we did some like observation reports. And the thing is that both yours like beautiful talk and the concept about deliberative pause and what were just brought up about the attention to the nature reminds me of this assignment I did for this course, because like through the assignment I had a very surprising moment. It was like during spring, I went to the plant, which was a tree on my campus I picked to observe at that time. And suddenly I found that there was some like new shoots growing, because like before that it was in the winter and the plant had no leaves or anything else. And so that day, like we had a rain during the night before that day. And during that day, I went to my tree and find that it has new leaves. And I was so surprised at that time, and I feel my connection to the tree and to the nature on the campus. And I actually, so like that moment is kind of sort of the moment that I will take in my heart through my whole life. And also the most surprising thing about that is that on that day, afterwards, it suddenly occurred to me that it actually is the spring equinox. So that's quite amazing for me to kind of, so the connection and also the day is the spring equinox. All of this let me find about something about natural regularities and natural laws, and also a lot of different contents and connections there. So I just want to share this, my personal story about how could a student find something about the nature through the assignments they do or something like that.
Right. Well, thank you for that narrative. And now your work, I think, if I can, dispense with some unsolicited advice, is to carry that out in your own teaching when you're teaching. And that, you pass that gift. You got a great gift by being given that assignment, and now your gift to others would be to have them do something similar. 2 points I want to make here. One is that so often you hear about sustainability and learning laboratories, but usually when we talk about that, we talk about it in terms of energy or daily habits and practices related to recycling or water use or plastic bottles or whatever else it might be. But I think the living laboratory also happens with moments of insight that take place as a result of artwork, or as a result of writing, or as a result of different things that you might see on a campus, in a campus setting. To me, those are attractors. Those are things. I've said this in many different places here this week. I always think of a college campus as a place that educates everyone who visits it, not just the matriculated students, but also the vendors, the donors, the parents, the community members who happen to wander by and through. And what are they learning? How are they being taught about environmental awareness or ecological justice or any of these things that we're concerned about? And what is the role of faculty and students in putting together projects that also teach? And that's to me, that's a really big part of the 9 elements of the sustainable campus.
Hi, thank you for your talk. Chandran, I'm faculty in environmental engineering here. And so my question is where does engineering fit into this framework that you've developed? And kind of a more meta question would be sort of like, there's kind of a blurring, right? So one example is what I've heard is like the Amazon rainforest could be thought of as a human-managed ecosystem that developed, from what little I know. But as an engineer, you hear like a dam built by beavers is an engineered system, but it's also, it's not seen as an engineered system. So where does engineering fit into?
Well, huh? And science. Well, all this global environmental change science is pretty fundamental, I think, and ecological science. But, Book, would you answer that question? Because we had a lot of engineers at that meeting this morning. Are you okay? I know you're not, but who's an engineer there? You both are. So we got 2 engineering students who I met this morning who were amazing people. One of them is yours. There you go. So which of you can both speak, but you tell your teacher.
So the spot that engineering has in all of this is that once we have the community aspect and we have people that want to make a difference, someone has to be there to help design some of the things that we need. And we can be part of the process to get there in the first place.
Dave, that was pithy and great. Sydney, do you want to add something?
Well, engineering at UC has a huge influence on the co-op program, which has a huge influence with employers. So I feel like that's a really good start for us to get green skills percolating through the students, is motivated by co-op. That's my take.
They know more than I do, for sure. And as for science, yes, I hope it was embedded in this. I feel that global environmental change and the science of global environmental change is fundamental. and very poorly understood. So I absolutely agree on that. And I also feel that to some extent, sustainability as a field has usurped environmental science a bit. And I feel that sustainability is a subset of environmental studies and environmental science in a way. That's where it comes from. And understanding basic natural history, basic ecology, basic global change science to me ought to be fundamental. That's my view.
Thanks again for your lecture. Jason King, I'm a community member. I was really interested in your comment about this idea of having both urgency and patience. And usually I think of those as polar opposite. Either it's urgent and you don't have patience, or you have patience because it's not urgent, right? But this idea that you hold both of those ideas in your hands at the same time. How do you think we're doing as a society in that process? Are we too urgent and trying to change things quicker than and in unhelpful ways, or too patient for things to change given the urgency of the needs?
It's a really good unanswerable question because you pose it in such big terms. So as a society, it's above my pay grade to even try to answer it. But I can say on an institutional level, that's where I have the experience. Visiting large and small institutions, being mainly involved in small institutions in my career. To me, it's always a balance between those two things. Because as I said before, in higher ed, if you're a small college, let's say, I'll talk about a small college, not the University of Cincinnati. If you don't change, you're not going to make it. And I would give that message out all the time at Unity. There are so many competing colleges out there. We have to do something that really, we have to change and be better at what we do. But I also knew that there are a lot of curmudgeons around, and there are a lot of blockers around. And what's the new word? There are a lot of doubters. And as a leader, believe me, they rear their head, and they let you know that they're there. And so you have to make a judgment about, well, first of all, can I charm them or not? And some you can and some you can't. Can I include them or not? Some you can and some you can't. But at some point you have to assess a campus's or an institution, an organization's readiness for change. And then, as I said before, how do you do that? For me, it's intuitive. It's improvisational. It's listening well. It's caring about other people and what they have to say. And then you push them a little bit harder than their capacity. I mean, there are other models. I mean, you could be Michael Crow at Arizona State, and you could push people so hard that they'll either go along with you or they'll leave, you know? But wow, he's really done something at Arizona State University. I wouldn't want to work for him. I know him quite well. He's great. He's amazing. He's transformed that university. They're absolutely incredible, what they do. It's just phenomenal. But every leader has a different temperament and demeanor as well, right? So it's a great question. I think it needs to be asked contextually, and it's different for every person. It's different for every institution. But I put them together because it's not one or the other. It's a modulation. I mean, in the book, I go through a bunch of these different poles. There's the relationship between tradition and innovation. Every college campus, espouses its wonderful tradition. Oh, no one does it like we do here at the University of Cincinnati, or we do at Unity College. Well, that's not true. You go out there and you realize there are a lot of places that do really great things. And so how do you honor a tradition of an institution and at the same time encourage them to innovate? Or the relationship between authority and autonomy. That's a real tough one. It's tough in the United States of America, isn't it? I mean, but it's tough at institutional levels, really tough with faculty. What is the extent to which faculty have autonomy to do the curriculum? What is the extent to which leaders, deans, provosts have to set some limits on how that works? It's a real tough one. There's a middle ground there. You can't have total autonomy in any system, and you can't have total authority. You figure out how to do it. So these are I really enjoy these kinds of challenges. And I'm not the last word. All I can tell you is what worked for me. And I was president of a little itty bitty college.
Can I just speak and give you maybe a little bit of hope? Because like your daughter, I am an elementary school teacher. I'm technically middle school and my school. A fifth grade teacher, I don't know if I need it. But I just recently met a gentleman who's here at UC, Joe Johnson, and he's in the IT department, as I understand, but he comes from a background of environmental studies, and he is going to be building out a curriculum on bats and biodiversity directly related to fifth graders, and I happen to be a fifth grade science teacher. So I'm excited to have the opportunity. I'm at a small private school here in Cincinnati, and we've made a connection, and then he of course has a community partner with Cincinnati Zoo. So we are reaching young children and trying to percolate that upwards. So there is hope there.
Oh, yeah.
And then my little request would be, I'm thinking of a sixth grade colleague of mine who would love a lot of the mapping that you had in this. So if I emailed you, would you send me off this PowerPoint slide so he could maybe borrow some of those?
Well,
that's what we educators like to do.
yeah, I mean, please do get in touch with me. I think it's all in the book, and you know, I think that's the place to get it. The book can be at most libraries. University Press books are in most libraries, and it's all in there. And that's probably a better way to do it, because the slide needs context. It means discussion. But you reminded me of something else I wanted to say. James, you really moved me yesterday in our meeting when you were talking about your father, and you were talking about how he saved his whole life so that he can get an SUV. And who are you to tell him now that that's kind of wasteful? And I thought that was a really poignant comment. And the reason why I'm bringing that up right now is because it's another one of these contextual kinds of issues where you have to make a judgment about what you can say and how you say it. And I'm sure if you have enough understanding of your dad that way, there are ways that you could get through to him on what it is that you care about, what matters to you. And I'm sure he's unbelievably proud of you doing what you're doing. So thank you for that story. And David, I was also moved by some of your comments as well, and how UC sees as non-proprietary. And it's really important to you that it's not that. And here's a great example of someone who was environmental studies but now is doing IT, and all the engineering folks, and you've got folks scattered around the entire institution who contribute to this work. C's can be a center, of course, but it was great to hear you say what you said, that there are so many different contributors to this kind of thing. These are great attitudes. I want to just bring them out and make them public, because I think they're really important. I think there's a lot of wisdom in them. So thank you for those comments, that learning for me while I was here.
And with that, let's please thank Mitchell Thomashow.
Thank you.